Hi, welcome to Tall Oak Homestead. My name is Carrie. Thanks for joining us today. I'm going to be doing some things in the kitchen. I'm going to bring you along with making some sourdough bread, some tomato jam, and some granola, which I plan to use for Christmas gifts for some friends and family. Let's get started. Okay, before we get started, we need to feed our starter. And if you'll notice, if you look into the jar, you can see there's like a grayish liquid on top of the starter at the bottom of the jar there, and that's called hooch. And it's telling you a few things. The first is that your sourdough is actually fermenting because that is an output of that. But also when you have that hooch, that tells you that your starter is hungry and it needs to be fed. So you can drain off that hooch if you don't want it. If it gets really dark, almost to a black color, then you're definitely going to want to drain it off. But I'm going to leave that in there. There's just a little bit of it. It also helps with your sourdough to make it a little more sour when you're actually using that. So to feed my starter, I'm just going to start I'm going to mix that in a little bit. I'm going to add in a cup of unfiltered room temperature water. Mix that around. Okay, that's pretty nicely mixed. My jar is starting to get really gross, so I want to transfer this to a clean jar just so that I don't get flour everywhere. I like to use one of these. And then so you put in equal parts flour and water. So 1 cup of unfiltered water and 1 cup of all-purpose flour. Get that stirred together really nicely. Now when I make my sourdough, I don't use all-purpose flour. I use bread flour. I sometimes use whole wheat flour. Where I got this recipe from was from Lisa on Farmhouse on Boone. She makes the most amazing sourdough recipes. And when I first started sourdough, it can be a little discouraging. My starter, the first 2 attempts did not work. And finally on my 3rd attempt to do a starter, it worked. And I've had this starter going for about a year now. And it's quite successful. And really, there's nothing nicer when you can make your own bread. And it's much better for you too, the sourdough, than some of all the, some of the stuff, the ingredients they have in the store-bought bread. And also there's nothing better when you walk into your house and all you can smell is freshly cooked bread. Okay, that's mixed pretty nicely there. So I'm going to transfer it to a new jar. So put that in the sink. I'm going to use this too, just so that I'm not making this as much mess. I don't like how cakey it gets around the lid, so I try really hard to clean that out, but there's just sometimes if you're in a little bit of a rush, or flour and water can be very messy. Okay, so I've mixed that together. I've fed the baby, so to speak. So now I'm going to leave it and let it just sit on the counter for a couple of hours. I'm going to leave the lid off and just let it get ready to make some bread a little later this evening. Okay, the starter's been out on the counter for about 4 or 5 hours. You can see how active the starter is. It's perfect and ready to go. Okay, so the starter, as I showed you, is nice and bubbly and ready to go. So I've got everything out here on the counter ready. I've got my scale, which I'm going to turn on, and I'm going to set to grams. I find when I make bread, I have more success when I use my scale and weigh everything out. So I'm going to put my bowl on, and then I'm going to tare it. So I go back to 0. And then the first thing I start with is my filtered water, 310 grams, up to a temperature of 90 degrees Fahrenheit. So I just put it in the microwave for a few minutes to take the edge off. Okay, there's 310. I'm going to tare that out. And then it wants 120 grams of starter. Look at that. That looks beautiful. A little bit more. Just going to quickly wipe this so it doesn't make a mess. We just put it into a new jar, so I try and keep it as clean as I can for as long as I can. There we go. I'm going to take that off the scale and add my 2 teaspoons of salt. I use sea salt. I always take my bowl off the scale when I am stirring. If you stir while you're on top of your scale and you're pressing down, it can mess around with the calibration. All right, so that's nice and mixed together. I'm going to put this back on and tare it back to 0. So it calls for 500 grams of flour. I'm going to measure that in. Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to take that off. And I'm going to start to mix this up. This is the messy part. I find I get it mixed just to a certain degree, and then I have to just get my hands in there to scrape everything off the bottom. I like to scrape as much as I can off the side, so it's you get as much of the dough in there as you can, or the flour, I should say. Okay, I'm going to switch to my hands. I'm going to wet my hand. It's coming together quite nicely. There's just a little bit of flour on the bottom. First few times I made sourdough and my dough turned out like this, I was actually a little discouraged. I thought I was doing something wrong, but not at all. It's very shaggy right now, and it doesn't look like much of anything. But now what we're going to do, now that everything's mixed together, we're going to cover this, and we're going to let it sit for an hour, and the water is going to soak into the flour. And we're going to do something called a stretch and fold, which is basically pulling and stretching on the dough to activate the yeast. Okay, so I'm going to get my fingers on this. I'm going to cover this with a towel, and I'm going to leave it on the top of the stove. I'm going to let that sit for an hour, and we'll be back. Okay, the dough is sat for an hour. Now we're going to do the first stretch and fold. See how the dough looks so much more moist, not as shaggy? You want to get your hands wet, or your hand, I should say. And you start at the top, like at 12 o'clock. Scooch under, pick up and shake, turn. Pick up and shake. And you'll notice as you do this that the dough becomes much moister. We'll go around twice. And there we go. That's our first stretch and fold. I'm going to cover it back up and let it sit for 20 minutes, and then I'm going to do another stretch and fold. Okay, the second 20 minutes has gone by. Going to wash our hand. We're going to do another set of stretch and fold. Dough is becoming very elastic. And very moist. The water has absorbed into the flour. It's going to be, just tell by this, it's going to make a great loaf of bread. So we're going to do this one more time. We're going to give it one more 20 minutes, and we're going to do another stretch and fold. And I'm going to take this dough out. Okay. Sprinkle a little bit of flour on the top here so it doesn't all stick together. Just work this in a little bit. mind if I just push and pull, kind of rolls it together to a ball. It's nice and tight. The extra little bit of flour helps remove some of the stickiness. This is a beautiful piece of dough. Okay. And that is what it looks like. That is absolutely beautiful. I'm going to get a fresh bowl and I'm going to put a little bit of olive oil on the bottom. It's going to rise overnight. I don't want it to stick, so first I'm going to drop it in, turn it over, just to make sure that both sides of the dough have a little bit of oil on them. I'm going to put a towel over for the night, and I'm going to let it sit. So in the morning when we get up, we're going to put this in the oven, and we're going to make a beautiful loaf of sourdough. Welcome back to day 2 of our project. I don't think I mentioned yesterday when we started this that when you make sourdough, it's a 2-day process. I typically make mine in the morning, or I cook mine in the morning. So then in order for that to happen, you have to start it the night before. You've got to let the dough rise quite a bit in your stretch and folds, and then it has to sit again for a considerable amount of time overnight. So we're going to get started today. The first thing I have to do though is I'm going to turn the oven on to 450 and heat up my pan. I cook just regular. On the regular oven, I don't use convection heat. And I use my cast iron pot. You're going to want to let that sit in the oven for a good 15 to 20 minutes and get nice and screaming hot. I'm just going to flour the countertop a little bit here so I can roll it out. A little bit of flour on the top. Just kind of roll it all in together onto itself like this, and then I'll turn it over, use the heel of my hands and just push down and pull towards myself. The dough feels beautiful. And I don't want to overwork the dough. You don't want to work out all of the bubbles. I just want to shape it nicely. Don't like the bottom to be all out of sorts like that. So I'm trying to roll it onto itself a few times to roll it all together. Just like that is beautiful. Okay, I'm going to get a piece of parchment paper. Sit and rest on the parchment paper until it's ready to go into the oven. And then at that point, we're going to cut some slits into it. Okay, the oven's come up to temperature. I'm just going to make a little cut in the top of my loaf of bread here. I don't have a proper little razor blade to do this, so I just use my little paring knife here. It seems to get the job done. And you don't have to do this. I just do this because it looks pretty. Okay, I'm going to get my pot out of the oven. It's screaming hot. And one thing I always do whenever I am using this pot and take the lid off, I always leave my glove on top. It's so easy to go and grab the pot and burn your hand. So a secret, before you put your loaf of bread into the pot, is you drop in an ice cube and you place this in directly on top. I work the parchment paper around a little bit just so that it's not bent over. And then get the top back on. Make sure it's on there nice and tight. And back in the oven. That'll cook with the lid on at 450 degrees for 20 minutes. And then I'm going to uncover it and cook it for 25 to 30 minutes. So I'll just set the timer. Okay. Now we can get started on our next project. I'm going to make some tomato jam. These are all tomatoes from my garden from last year. I had so many of them, and we can only use so many at a time. So I throw them in the freezer, and then during the winter time, as projects come about, I take them out and use them. If I want to make a quick tomato soup, I throw a bag of tomatoes in the oven with some onion, some other veggies, roast them up, and then put them in a pot, puree them with some stock and a bit of cream, and it's delicious. So for these, we have to peel them. It's going to take me a few minutes to do that. And actually, when you freeze your tomatoes and you let them thaw overnight in the fridge, it's very easy to peel. But if I was doing this with fresh, not frozen tomatoes, I would be dropping them into boiling water for maybe a minute or two. You can see if you crush your tomato like this and then put it in the pot of boiling water, it starts the process of the skin coming off. And I'm not too concerned about making sure I get all of the tomato skin off, because at some point these are going to boil for quite a long time in the pot. But then I can, if I feel like I'm seeing a lot of tomato skins, I'll get my hand mixer out and I'll puree it even further. But for the length of time that we're going to be cooking these, I think it's not going to be an issue. These are all Romas, or actually these were San Marzanos that I grew this past summer. These were not San Marzanos. What were these? These were a beefsteak type of tomato. I don't recall the name off the top of my head. I have to look that up. I did I did a San Marzano and another one called A. Grappellini. Those are Andrew's favorites. They were absolutely prolific this year. I can't believe how many tomatoes that we got. It was incredible. The recipe calls for 12 ripe tomatoes. I've got clearly a few more than 12, only because these are smaller tomatoes. So what I'll do as I do with any recipe that I follow, I always tweak it. So I think what I'll do is I'm putting in the other ingredients. I will adjust just a little bit more just to make up for the extra tomatoes. Some of these that are not peeling easily, as I said, I'm not too concerned because they'll boil up and I'll be able to get my stick blender in there and puree it. This would be a great time if I had freeze dryer. I could, all these tomato skins and any of the offcuts, you just put them in the freeze dryer, and then once they're finished going through the process, put them in your blender and grind it up, and it's like tomato powder. So whenever you're making a soup or gravy or cooking anything, you can throw some of that on for extra flavor. See, every time I can come up with a use for a freeze dryer, I have to verbalize it to put it out in the universe. So hopefully one day I'll come home and Andrew will have one here waiting for me. Does that work? Does that logic work? Can only hope, right? Last one here, and then we're going to cut these up and put them into the pot and get them going on the stove. I'll get my pot. I'm just looking for any imperfections that I didn't see when I was peeling. I do like to get the little core out, though. I don't want to cook that. Tomatoes are funny. They can look beautiful on the outside until you cut them up. You can have some pretty ghastly things going on inside. It's amazing to me that when you think of a tomato, you think of like a tomato sandwich or soups. But I tell you, this tomato jam that I'm making, excuse me, it is so delicious. It's sweet, it's savory, it has such a nice bite to it. I add an extra ingredient that's not necessarily part of the recipe, and it's just, I think it gives it such great flavor. Oh, there's a cord there. I love to cook, I love to preserve, I love to bake bread. These are all things that I've started doing later in life. Certainly didn't have the time to do it when we were raising the kids, but it's something I really enjoy doing now. And I also really enjoy when I'm making these preserves or whatever I make to share with other people. I just really think it's so nice when you can make something and give that as a gift to somebody. For me, that's my way of my gift of the heart. It's easy to go into a store and buy something, but for me, I'd rather share something I've put my love into. Well, after I've tasted it and make sure it's okay to give to somebody. Have you ever done that? Have you ever tried a recipe out on people when they've come to your house in a brand new one and you haven't tried it before and it's gone wrong? I think we've probably all done that. Okay, just about done with these tomatoes. Oh, one more in here. A bit of skin, but that's okay. Okay. Put that in the sink. Wash my hand a bit. All right. So to the tomatoes, doesn't look like a lot of tomatoes. I'm going to put in 2.5 cups of sugar. Half a cup. 1, 2. Get that stirred up. That all stirred together. Doesn't look like much now, but I promise you it's going to taste delicious. Okay, get this on the burner and get it started. Okay, our 20-minute timer's gone off. Let's take this out. I'll take the lid off. Oh, that looks beautiful. I'll bring you in here so you can see this up close. Look how beautiful that is. Now we're going to finish cooking for about 25 minutes uncovered and brown it up. Look at the tomatoes are nicely boiling. Okay, the timer's gone off for the bread. Let's give it a check. Oh, it looks beautiful. We just have to check the temperature. Sourdough needs to be between 205, 215 for doneness. We're up to 203, 204. And this is done. Okay. Perfect. One of our projects finished. I'll just get this on a rack and I'll give you a close-up look of it. Look at that thing of beauty. And let it sit there and cool. Okay, now that we have the bread out of the oven, I can adjust the oven heat for the granola, and that's at 325. But this I do cook on convection. So it is going to be already up to temperature because we were cooking at a much higher temperature. So I'm just going to leave that. Now we're going to start mixing all of our things together. So the rolled oats. Sunflower seeds. Our pumpkin seeds. Our almonds. Okay. And get these stirred together. It smells absolutely delicious in here between the bread, the cooking tomatoes, and all of these seeds. It smells delicious. So those are our dry ingredients. We'll set that aside. And then it calls for the coconut oil. So I was going on earlier about the freeze dryer. If any of you have any suggestions for me on how I can make this happen, love to hear the comments. Let's start a get carry a freeze dryer movement. And the honey, I added a little bit extra honey because I was just a little shy on the coconut oil. I wanted to make sure that we had enough moisture. Oh, this honey smells so good. I don't want to waste any of it. Okay. That's for brown sugar. I think 2 tablespoons of brown sugar. One. There's 2. Vanilla extract, 2 teaspoons. I never measure my vanilla. I always pour from the heart. There's 1, 2. Cinnamon, calls for a teaspoon of cinnamon. Teaspoon of ground clove. I only have whole cloves. I had to go to the bulk barn to get some more ground cloves. So that's why it's in this plastic bag. And it calls for a half a teaspoon of nutmeg. I prefer my nutmeg whole so I can grind it on my own. Oh, it smells delicious. And again, with the nutmeg like this, it's hard to measure. So I just kind of go with what I think my heart's going to like. I think that's enough. Okay. And salt. How much salt do we need? Half a teaspoon of salt. Okay, stir this around as much as we can, I guess. And I'm going to put it in the microwave for a couple of minutes and melt it. Oh, one thing I wanted to add too. I wanted to add a little bit of coconut to cook with the granola. All right, that should be fine. Let's give this one final mix. I'm actually going to get my whisk, I think, just to give it a good mix to make sure all of the dry spices are incorporated nicely so we don't get a lump of anything. Oh, seems to be good. Perfect. Okay. Let's pour this over top of the bowl here. Get every last bit out. Right, let's get this stirred together. Oh, it smells delicious. Cinnamon and nutmeg are such nice warm seasonings. Okay. Just a couple more mixes here to make sure every little bit in this bowl is covered. And I'm going to transfer it onto a baking sheet. I've lined my largest baking sheet with parchment paper. And I'm going to spread this out. I'm very excited to give this as part of a little gift basket. Some of my friends and family. I'm going to be doing some baking next week. I'm going to try an eggnog fudge. I've never made that before. One of my favorite YouTubers that I watch is Becky on Acre Homestead, and she made some of this eggnog fudge, and I thought I'd like to try it. Also going to make some of our favorite cookies. I'm going to probably do some shortbread, Andrew's requested lemon bars, and I might do some icebox cookies as well. I think we're ready for the oven. I'll just wipe my hand off. That's going to cook for 20 minutes, but halfway through, after 10, I'm going to go in and I'm going to stir it so that everything is evenly coated. I've got the rack adjusted so it's in the middle. As I mentioned, I do have the convection on, so it will be circling. Okay, and we'll set our timer for 10 minutes. And we'll check that back in a few minutes. Okay, the granola's been in the oven now for 10 minutes. It's time to pull it out and give it a little stir. Oh, it smells delicious. Yeah, it still has a ways to go. It's still quite sticky. Okay. Put that back in the oven. Set the timer again. Wanted to show you the tomatoes up close, how beautiful they look. They're ready for their next ingredients, so I'll get those added. See how thick that is? It's beautiful. Okay, we need to add 2 cups of white vinegar. 2 cups of white vinegar. We need a teaspoon of cinnamon. I'm going to put a little bit extra because I had extra tomatoes. Teaspoon of ground clove, and again, I'll just probably do like a teaspoon and a half. Teaspoon of salt. And then I didn't have a jalapeno, but I do have some lovely red pepper flakes. I'm going to add some of that in for a little bit of spice. Get this all stirred together. It's going to have to boil like a little bit longer now that we've added the vinegar. It's not as thick as it first was, so we'll let that all boil together until it thickens up. Then we can jar it. I'm doing something a little different. Because I'm giving this to people as a gift, I'm not sure when they're going to use it. I'm going to water bath can them. Well, actually, I'm going to steam can them. which is the same as water bath canning. But if I was just giving it to somebody that I know was going to put it directly in their fridge and eat it right away, then I wouldn't bother with that step. But because I don't know when they're going to be eating it, I want to make sure it's stable on the shelf. And it will crunch up a little bit. And we'll let it cool, and it will harden up as it cools. Just put it up here on the rack. Get some airflow through it. Let that cool. Okay, so the jam I think is cooked enough that we can take it off and get it into jars and then get the water bath canner started. So I'm just going to move the granola out of the way. I'll just get a zoom in here for you so you can have a look and see. It's beautiful. It's a nice rich color. I'm going to use my steam canner. So you fill up the bottom so the water is flush with your rack. It's got to be hot water. Actually, I'm going to test the temperature, because the reason for that is if you're filling up your jars with a hot liquid and you put it into something that's at a lower temperature, your jars are going to probably crack on you. So you always want to make sure you put like with like when you're starting your water bath can. So you're going to have hot water in your canner. I'm going to turn the burner on to start it and get warmed up. And I'll put the lid on just to keep it warm inside. Okay. Get my jars. I'm not sure how much this will actually do, but it looks lovely, and I think we should probably taste it before we give it away to anybody. That's delicious. It's very tart. You can taste the clove, the vinegar. That will go delicious on a cracker with some cheese. All right, let me get something to scoop that out. Yeah, it's starting to set already, so I think we got it out just in time. And it calls for a 1/4 inch headspace. And what that means, it's the amount of space between the top of your jar and the top of your jam. That's what headspace is. And depending on what you're doing, preserving, they're all different. But for this particular recipe, it's a 1/4 inch. It's interesting when you're making things like this and you go to all the trouble of the cutting and the preparing, and especially when you're working with tomatoes, you start out with so much and the end result seems to be so much less. Like we have 4 little jars there, and I think there's probably enough to do 1 more jar. I made a bit of a mess of that one. I'll get another one here. All right, I'm going to have to get my spatula out. There we go. All right, we have 5 jars. I'm going to leave that there because what's left in the jar or in the pan here, I'm just going to scoop into a small bowl and we can enjoy that as a treat later. Same with my jar. Oh, I can hear the canner starting to heat up. All right, we need to get some vinegar to wipe the tops of the lids. Whenever whether you're pressure canning or water bath canning, you always need to wipe your top of your jar prior to putting the lids on. And I always use vinegar. And as you'll see there, that was along the top of the jar. If that was left on there, the jar wouldn't seal properly. So you want to make sure that it seals properly, so you have to have a nice clean surface. So wipe around the top, on the side of the jar there at the top. This is setting up beautifully. One more. Okay, put the lids on. And when you put your ring on, you just do it to touch. You don't do it too tight. Get these jars in here. Oop, they're a little warm. The first time you use your steam canner, you have to do a temperature indicator test, so that it's based on your elevation, and it tells you when it gets to the max boiling point what it should be. So I have done that before in my max on my instruction manual here. My mark max point is T. So I've put that little indicator on the top of my pot here. When the water reaches that point to the T, then you've got to turn your canner down to maintain that heat. And then once that heat is maintained, that's when you start your time. So for these particular recipe, it's got to process for 10 minutes. So I leave that in there for 10 minutes and I turn it off, and then they sit in there for an extra 5 minutes. Then you take the lid off and you can take your jam out. And you can hear it whistling at the back. There's a little hole where the steam escapes. I always move that to the back. That's very hot and you could really burn yourself. Okay, we're at the tea. I'm going to adjust my temperature and we're going to give it 10 minutes. Okay, the granola has cooled down enough. Now we can mix it all together. That's the best way of doing this without making a complete mess. There we go. Just a little fallout. Okay, we've got our fruit here. It's on top. We can mix all that together. Make a mess while we're doing it. It's going to be a nice mix here with some of the coconut toasted and then some of it just raw like this. I think it's going to be delicious. All right, I think that's mixed up pretty good. Okay. We'll get this back in the bowl. All right, I've got my jars here. With the granola, it doesn't have to be sealed like the jam, obviously. It just needs to be in an airtight container. Okay. seems to work out perfectly. A cup in each one. What are your thoughts? Would you like to receive something like this as a gift? Let me know your thoughts on homemade gifts. Last year I gave friends and family hot chocolate already prepared. Oops, that's a little too much in that one. Oh no, it wasn't hot chocolate. It was brownie mix. Some of my seeds from my garden that I saved. I don't remember what else there was. Something else that I made in there. This year my plan is to gift this granola. I'm also wanting to gift the tomato jam we just made together. I've made some vanilla, which I made back in August, and it's been sitting. And I'm hoping to also add some cookies that we're going to work on together next week. The dogs are going to come over shortly and clean up after me. Let me just 7 of these jars. Perfect. Don't want to go on. Let's try another jar. There we go. Okay, there we go. There's our granola project done. Perfect. Okay, the jam is also finished in the steamer. I'm going to get that out. You have to be very careful. Always lift your lid and turn it away from you. So if there's any steam still coming out, it's not going to be directed towards you. Place these over here. Another one of my dream appliances is to have an electric steam canner. You basically just put the water in the bottom, close the lid, and it does all the thinking for you. It looks almost like an Instant Pot. So we're going to add that to our wish list of our Carrie's appliance wish list with the freeze dryer. So guys, help me think of ways I can get this done. Okay, here's our jam. We're going to let it sit. I'm just going to dry the top a little bit here. I'm going to let it sit and wait for it to seal. Okay, that wraps it up for today. We were able to get our granola made, our tomato jam, and our sourdough bread. It's already wrapped up and in the freezer. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed all the things that I had shared with you. If you haven't already liked and subscribed, please do so. And we're looking forward to seeing you again soon. Bye, friend.